I sit in the silence of my twilight years. Zetian, once emperor of China, now a woman stripped of her crown. The candles in my chamber flicker against lacquered walls as I put brush to paper, the same walls that once echoed with my edicts and commands. It has been only months since I relinquished the dragon throne, pressured by ministers and my own sons to yield the power I spent a lifetime seizing. In the stillness of this former palace residence, I can still hear the distant roar of the court, my court, now belonging to someone else. The air is heavy with incense and memory. As the night breeze rustles the silk drapes, I reflect on the winding path that brought me here. From an ambitious girl in a patriarchal world to the undisputed sovereign of a vast empire, and finally to a solitary old woman with only her memories for company. I have no official titles left, but I was once emperor, the only woman in China's long history to hold that sacred post. How did I, a mere girl from Sichuan, ascend to heights no other woman dreamed possible? My story is painted in bold strokes of ambition, love, betrayal, and blood. I write this memoir to tell the truth of my life as I know it, unvarnished by the Confucian scholars who malign me. The truth may be ugly at times. I have walked through gardens of delight and fields of carnage, but it is my truth. And as I write, I can almost smell the lotus blossoms of my girlhood and the iron tang of battle in the air. I can hear the whispers of silken robes in imperial halls and the cries of those who dared stand against me. My life has been a storm. Now, in its calm aftermath, I gather the strength to revisit every dramatic turn. In these pages, nothing will be held back. I will show you the girl, the lover, the mother, the ruler, and the woman I became. If I am to be remembered, let it be in full. Come, sit with me among these flickering candles. Let me take you back to the beginning, when I was just Wu Zhao, a hopeful girl with fire in her heart.
I was born in 624 during the reign of Emperor Gaozu in the early Tang dynasty, though of course I did not know the significance of the date then. My family named me Wu Zhao. I was the second daughter of a respected noble family in Shanxi, far from the capital. My father, Wu Shihuo, was a general-turned-official who had helped the Tang founders rise to power. From my earliest days, I was surrounded by books, silk scrolls of poetry and history, the classics that most girls were forbidden to study. My father, a forward-thinking man, insisted I be educated like a son. I learned to read and write fluently, to play the lute, to compose poetry. I remember the scratch of my brush on paper as a child, practicing characters late into the night while other girls slept. My mother sometimes fretted that no man would want such an opinionated, learned girl. But I was my father's daughter. He told me that intelligence is a greater jewel than any ornament. In our candlelit study, he taught me statecraft and strategy, recounting battles and court intrigues as though they were bedtime tales. I soaked it all in, dreaming impossible dreams that maybe, just maybe, I was destined for something greater than embroidery and marriage. I was also headstrong and curious. When I was barely a teenager, I learned to ride horses astride, like a man rather than side saddle, and loved the feeling of freedom it gave me. I would race through the fields of wildflowers on my mare, the wind whipping my hair, imagining I was leading an army or flying like a dragon. Tang Dynasty women were not as sheltered as before. Noble ladies rode and even played polo, and I took full advantage of this relatively liberal atmosphere. Still, ambition in a girl was not truly welcomed. I often overheard neighbors say I was too bold, that my sharp tongue and keen eyes would be my downfall. I paid them no mind outwardly, but inside, I nurtured a quiet resolve. If society would not grant me power because I was female, I would have to seize it for myself one day. Fate did not take long to test that resolve. When I turned 14, a messenger from the imperial court arrived at our villa. I can still picture the day. A brilliant blue sky, the scent of pine smoke from our hearth, my mother rushing to straighten my dress. Emperor Taizong, the mighty Li Shimin himself, had summoned me to the palace as a concubine. My reputation for beauty and intelligence had somehow reached the throne. As I bid my family farewell, fear and excitement dueled in my chest. The capital, Chang'an, glittered in my imagination, a world of silk and gold, intrigue and danger. I was eager to see it with my own eyes, yet I trembled at leaving home for a harem where hundreds of girls vied for favor. My father placed his calloused hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Show them you're mine, little Zhao, not just your face. That will be your strength." I nodded, holding back tears as our carriage departed in a cloud of dust. I was on my way to destiny, armed with nothing but my wits and youthful daring. Concubine of the Emperor. The imperial palace at Chang'an overwhelmed my senses from the moment I arrived. Stepping through the vermilion gates, I smelled incense drifting from distant temples and heard the musical tinkling of jade pendants on courtiers' belts. Gilded pillars and polished marble floors gleamed everywhere my eyes traveled. As a fresh concubine of fifth rank, a kairen they called it, I was clad in new silks. Yet I felt like a small sparrow lost in a vast gilded cage. Emperor Taizong was already in his 40s, a formidable figure with a neatly combed beard and piercing eyes that missed nothing. I was presented to him along with a line of other young ladies. When my turn came, I made sure to meet his gaze with respect, but without fear. Something in my demeanor pleased him, for I was soon assigned not to some distant servant's quarters, but to work under the emperor's eye as a junior secretary of sorts. I recall one of my earliest days at court, a day that quickly became legendary among the palace women. Emperor Taizong had a wild Arabian horse, a stallion with a fiery temper that no stable master could tame. Frustrated, His Majesty asked his assembled concubines in attendance, half in jest, how the beast might be controlled. Other women tittered nervously or offered meek shrugs, but I stepped forward, heart pounding. "Your Majesty, I can subdue that horse," I declared, "but I require 3 items, an iron whip, an iron mace, and a dagger." A hush fell. Emperor Taizong raised an intrigued brow and asked me to explain. Taking a deep breath, I answered, "First, I will whip him with the iron whip. If he does not submit, I will strike him on the head with the iron mace, and if he still refuses, I will cut his throat with the dagger." For a moment, the only sound was the stallion's distant snorting. Then the emperor threw back his head and laughed in delight. "Truly, you have the courage of a warrior," he exclaimed. My bold answer, equal parts metaphor and menace, had made its mark. From that day, Taizong often called on me to discuss affairs of state or to recite literature. He even entrusted me with reading and copying important documents over the next few years, a task that taught me the inner workings of government. While other concubines perfected dance steps or musical serenades, I was hunched over imperial edicts by lamplight, absorbing knowledge that no other woman at court possessed. Despite our closeness in intellect, Taizong and I were never lovers in the truest sense. He admired my mind, and I respected his authority, but I was a girl of 14, and he a middle-aged emperor. I did not bear him any children in the years I served him. Instead, I became something like a trusted aide. Sometimes I would catch one of his wives or high-ranked consorts watching me with narrowed eyes, puzzled or jealous that the emperor discussed strategy with a teenage girl. I kept my demeanor demure in public, but inside I felt a burgeoning confidence. I began to see that knowledge was power, and I was gaining both. Yet those days of learning were not to last forever. In 649, Emperor Taizong fell gravely ill. The palace was thick with the scent of medicinal herbs and the hushed prayers of monks. I stayed by his bedside as he weakened, reading sutras aloud in the flickering lamplight. The emperor's death hit the court like a thunderclap. We all wore white mourning robes and wailed in ritual grief. But behind the lamentations, I felt terror gnawing at me. According to custom, when an emperor dies, his concubines who had not borne him children must leave the palace, shave their heads, and live out their days in a Buddhist convent, praying for the emperor's soul. It was a tradition meant to remove us from politics entirely, a living death for women like me. I was only 25, still young and full of ambition, when I was sent away to Ganya Temple. The day I took the vows as a nun, I remember the cold blade shearing my long black hair. As each lock fell to the ground, I bit my lip until I tasted blood, forcing back tears. The other discarded concubines chanted sutras around me, their voices low and lifeless. The temple was quiet and Spartan. Nights brought the howling of the wind and the distant roar of temple gongs. I was expected to resign myself to oblivion, to bury Wuzhou forever behind monastery walls. But even as I donned the plain robes of a nun and bowed before the Buddha, I swore to myself that this would not be my end. By the light of butter lamps, I secretly kept my mind sharp, copying scriptures to keep my calligraphy skills, practicing public speaking by reciting prayers. I had tasted the power and knowledge of court life, and I refused to believe that the gods had brought me this far only to abandon me in a cloister. My story was not over. Return to the palace and to love. The turning point came unexpectedly, 1 year after Emperor Taizong's death. In accordance with tradition, the new emperor, Emperor Gaozong, Taizong's son and successor, visited Ganye Temple on the anniversary of his father's passing. We former concubines lined the courtyard, shaven-headed and humble, as Emperor Gaozong and his entourage lit incense and offered prayers. I knelt among the others, heart hammering. I had met Gaozong, then Prince Li Ji, once or twice back in the palace. He was nearer to my age, a gentle and somewhat timid young man. To my astonishment, when his gaze swept over the gathering of nuns, it lingered on me. Recognition sparked in his eyes. In that moment, memories flooded back, a fleeting moment in the palace years ago when I caught the young prince secretly watching me play the zither. The rumors I'd heard that the prince had found me beautiful. Now here we were, roles reversed. He, the son of heaven, and I, an abandoned, tonsured woman. As the ceremony ended, Emperor Gaozong approached. Looking upon me in my plain garb, with no hair and no finery, tears actually welled in his eyes. "Lady Wu, how have you been?" he asked softly. His genuine emotion took me aback. No one had asked how I felt in a very long time. We spoke briefly of the past, our voices barely above whispers. I confessed that life in the temple was lonely and harsh. My eyes met his, and I saw a flicker of guilt and longing. Perhaps he recalled how unfair my fate was, or perhaps he remembered the spark that once passed between us in his father's court. Boldly I tested him. With a bitter smile I said, "Your Majesty is the Son of Heaven, yet even you cannot change my wretched fate." Gaozong straightened, replying, "I am the Emperor. I can do anything." Those words set my heart racing with hope. Soon after, whispers in the temple said the Emperor had ordered that I be released from my vows and brought back to the imperial harem. In truth, Empress Wang herself, Gaozong's wife, had a hand in this. The Empress had been struggling to hold the Emperor's attention, which was wandering to a low-born but pretty consort named Xiao. Seeing an opportunity, Empress Wang suggested bringing me, Wu Zhao, back to court, hoping I might distract Gaozong from her rival consort Xiao. Little did Empress Wang know the chain of events she was setting in motion. How fate loves irony. The Empress welcomed a tigress back into her own household, thinking to use me as a pawn. When I re-entered the palace, no longer a nun, but now consort Wu, I felt as though I'd been reborn. My hair had grown just enough to pin up simply. I traded the coarse robes of Ganya Temple for silken gowns once more. The sounds and sights of court life enveloped me. The clatter of servants' footsteps, the murmur of ladies-in-waiting gossiping behind sleeves, the music of night banquets echoing through corridors. Emperor Gaozong welcomed me warmly, warmer than propriety allowed, and soon I became one of his favored companions. I was given the rank of Zhaoyi, a high-ranking consort. Empress Wang began to realize, too late, that I was no mere distraction. I was intelligent and charming, and I quickly won Gaozong's affections completely. In the evenings, I would discuss politics with him as I once did with his father, guiding his decisions with a subtle hand. During the day, I made sure to appear the picture of humility and filial respect, even befriending Empress Wang to allay her suspicions. Within a couple of years, I secured the emperor's devotion, and, critically, I bore him children. I knew that to truly challenge Empress Wang, I had to give Gaozong sons, something Empress Wang had failed to do. And so I did. First a son, Li Hong, and then a second son, Li Xian, by the time I was in my early 30s. The joy of holding my healthy baby boys in my arms only strengthened my determination. Gaozong was overjoyed with his new sons, and my influence grew with each birth. The empress, seeing my rising star, grew desperate and jealous. What had begun as a petty harem rivalry was about to escalate into a life and death struggle. The crucial confrontation arrived in the form of a tiny newborn girl. In the year 654, I gave birth to a daughter, a beautiful infant princess with delicate features. I remember the fragrance of talcum and the warmth of her little body. I named her, lovingly, only to have fate snatch her away after just a few weeks. One morning, tragedy struck. My baby daughter was found lifeless in her crib, dead under mysterious circumstances. I was beyond myself with grief and fury. Cradling my child's limp body, I felt a cold clarity steal over me. The emperor's primary wife, Empress Wang, had been one of the last to visit the child. In fact, just the day before, Empress Wang had come to see the newborn, cooing over her and holding her in her arms while I watched silently. The empress loved children and perhaps meant no harm, but I saw an opportunity. If I accused the empress of murder, Gaozong might finally depose her. It was a terrible gamble, one that could cost me my life if I failed. But in that moment, holding my dead daughter, I felt that nothing was off limits now. Summoning every ounce of sorrow and rage, I wailed and accused Empress Wang. "She has killed my child! The Empress murdered her out of jealousy!" I cried. Chaos erupted. Empress Wang rushed in, shocked and denying the charge vehemently, her face gone pale. But I was an accomplished actress by then. I sobbed uncontrollably, tearing at my robes, demanding justice. I swore I had seen Empress Wang near the nursery and that no one else could have done this heinous deed. Gaozong, distraught over the death of his infant girl and swayed by my anguish, believed me. The Empress's fate was sealed in that instant. Guards seized Wang, and also her ally consort Xiao, who had also been implicated in plotting against me before. Both women were dragged away, screaming their innocence. I stood there, tears drying on my face, feeling both triumph and a sickening guilt roiling in my stomach. I had won, but at the price of my own flesh and blood. To this day, I cannot say the name of that little girl without a pain in my heart. I tell myself that her brief life had purpose, that through her death, her mother survived and rose to greatness. It is a cold comfort for a mother's soul, but it had to suffice. With Empress Wang removed, Emperor Gaozong lost no time in elevating me. I became the new Empress Consort of Tang in 655, the highest-ranking woman in the empire. The ceremony was lavish. I wore robes of the finest gold-woven silk and a crown of jade and phoenix feathers. As I knelt to receive the imperial seal beside Gaozong, I felt the weight of it, literally and figuratively. I had achieved what I set out to do. I was now Empress Wu, the emperor's wife, no longer a concubine with precarious favor. I had secured my position through cunning and sacrifice. But I knew that was only the beginning. For Empress Wang and consort Xiao, I showed no mercy. Once deposed, they were initially confined to prison. But I could not risk leaving them alive as rallying figures for my enemies. In a decisive stroke, I ordered their execution. Dark rumors swirled for years about what I did. Some said I had Wang and Xiao's hands and feet cut off, their bodies thrown into wine jars, turning them into human swine. This grotesque tale was likely an exaggeration spread by my detractors in later generations. The truth is simpler. I had them quietly strangled. Their miserable lives ended in a dank cell far from the public eye. As I see it, it was a cleaner death than they might have wished for me if our positions were reversed. Still, after they were gone, I sometimes had nightmares of Empress Wang's face, her eyes bulging, her lips mouthing pleas, and I would awaken with my heart pounding. Even now, I occasionally wonder, did her ghost follow me all these years, watching as I claimed the life she thought would always be hers? Empress of the Tang, ruling from the shadows. Sitting as Empress beside Emperor Gaozong, I projected an image of loyal subservience. But the reality was that power was now shared between us, and increasingly, it was I who held the reins. Gaozong was a kindly man, but weak-willed and often in poor health. After a few years on the throne, he began to suffer debilitating headaches and spells of dizziness, likely the effects of hypertension or minor strokes. I remember nights in the royal bedchamber, the sharp scent of herbal remedies in the air as I pressed cool cloths to his forehead. He would grasp my hand and say, "My empress, I cannot face the court tomorrow. You must manage in my stead." And so I did. In 660, Gaozong had a major stroke that partially paralyzed him and impaired his vision. From that point on, I effectively governed the empire, though I made sure to do so in his name at first. I would sit behind a screen beside the throne during court sessions, a mere silhouette. But ministers learned that the voice whispering from behind the yellow silk carried imperial authority. Soon I dispensed with even that pretense. I joined Gaozong openly in audiences, issuing edicts on his behalf when he was too weak to speak. Some in court were scandalized, a woman and an empress at that, daring to assert political power. But many ministers grudgingly respected my grasp of statecraft. They saw that I rewarded competence and had little patience for sycophants or fools. I swiftly moved to consolidate our rule. I orchestrated a purge of officials who had opposed my rise. My late uncle-in-law, the esteemed Chancellor Chengsun Wuji, had never approved of me. He found himself accused of treasonous plotting and was forced to commit suicide in 659. Other aristocrats who looked down on that woman Wu were exiled or demoted. In their place, I elevated new men, people of talent from humbler backgrounds whose loyalty would be to me alone. I even reformed the imperial examination system to emphasize real learning and merit over noble birth. In doing so, I undercut the old noble family's monopoly on high office and built a base of support among the rising scholar official class. Many of these men were brilliant and grateful to me. They became my eyes and ears across the administration. Of course, not all my methods were enlightened. I did not shy away from ruthlessness when I deemed it necessary. I established a network of informers and secret police who reported any whisper of dissent. When conspiracies against us were discovered, and there were several, especially from die-hard supporters of the ousted Empress's clan, I responded with harsh punishments. I tasked cruel but effective enforcers like Lai Junchin to root out traitors. Torture was employed to extract confessions. Yes, I sanctioned it. There were beheadings and public executions of those who dared plot rebellion. I even ordered members of my own extended Wu family to be exiled or executed if they overstepped or threatened my authority. I sometimes think I was like a gardener pruning a great tree, cutting away diseased or excess branches so that the trunk might grow stronger. The court knew well. To cross Empress Wu was to invite doom. Fear became another tool in my arsenal to maintain order. Yet, alongside the fear, there was respect, and even admiration from those who served me closely. I proved to be an incredibly capable administrator. Under my guidance, the imperial court became more efficient and less corrupt. I did away with the idle luxury of some nobles and insisted on competence. Detractors later painted me as a wanton murderer, but I executed no more ministers than any strong emperor of that age. Indeed, my own Tang predecessors had shed plenty of blood to secure their thrones. I simply had the misfortune, or fortune, of being a woman, which made my every action doubly scrutinized. Let me recall one illustrative incident. Once, an official tried to flatter me by comparing a particularly delicate peony flower in the garden to my beauty. I smiled at the compliment. In fact, I loved peonies and had them planted all over the palace. But later that year, I commanded the flowers to bloom out of season to decorate a winter festival. Naturally, the peonies defied me. They stayed dormant in the cold. In a fit of imperial pique, I ordered every last peony shrub uprooted and burned in punishment. It was an absurd command, but no one dared object. The charred scent of those royal gardens lingered for days. This story is often told as proof of my arrogance, how I demanded even nature bend to my will. There is truth in that. I had grown accustomed to absolute obedience. If reality disappointed me, I sought to correct it by any means. Sometimes I regret destroying those lovely flowers. Other times I smirk at the audacity I had. The audacity to think nothing and no one could stand against Wu Zetian, not even Mother Nature herself. During these years, I also demonstrated a shrewd political mind in external affairs. The Tang Empire was surrounded by potential threats: Tibetans to the west, Turkic nomads to the north, Korean kingdoms to the east. Emperor Gaozong nominally reigned, but it was I who made many decisions. We continued campaigns in the Korean peninsula, building on Taizong's efforts. By 668, our forces, aided by the Korean kingdom of Silla, crushed the kingdom of Goguryeo, extending Tang influence in Korea. I recall reading dispatches of the fall of Pyongyang, the Goguryeo capital, and feeling satisfaction that our dynasty's reach had grown. We managed to make Silla a vassal, though they would later resist us. On other frontiers, I balanced war and diplomacy, keeping the Turks and Mongols in check with occasional battles, but also strategic marriages and treaties. I like to think of myself as a chess player, moving pieces on the board for the long-term stability of the empire. And for the most part, our people prospered. Taxes were manageable, commerce along the Silk Road flourished, bringing wealth from distant lands, and the peasants were largely at peace. When droughts or floods struck, I ensured relief efforts were prompt. I even reduced taxes, and at one point in later years gave the entire empire a tax holiday for a year to ease their burden. These were not the acts of a cruel tyrant with no care for her subjects. These were the acts of a ruler who wanted legitimacy through good governance. All the while, I juggled the roles of empress, mother, and the true power behind the throne. My sons were growing up under the wing of a formidable mother. I poured affection on them in their youth, especially after losing my infant daughter. My eldest surviving son, Li Hong, was named crown prince in 656. He was a bright boy, gentle-hearted, perhaps too much so. I loved him, but as he became a teenager, I sensed a rift. Li Hong grew close to some Confucian tutors and started to develop his own ideas of governance. There was an occasion when he pleaded with me to release some of Emperor Taizong's princesses, daughters of Consort Xiao, from house arrest and allow them to marry. A mercy I had, until then denied out of spite. Li Hong also suggested I should not involve myself so much in state affairs, implying I ought to let Gaozong fully lead. His words felt like a betrayal, even if mildly spoken. My own son, suggesting I step back. I realized that if Li Hong took the throne, he might undo my life's work, influenced by those who resented me. In 675, tragedy befell the royal family again. Li Hong died suddenly of an illness. He was only around 23. People whispered that I poisoned him for opposing me. To this day, I will not confirm the specifics of Li Hong's death. I will only say that I did what I must to secure the empire's future. I shed genuine tears for Hong. He was my flesh and blood after all. But I also moved swiftly to install my next son, Li Xian, as the new heir. Thus the line of succession remained one I could control. Emperor Gaozong's health continued to wane. On a cold winter day in December 683, Gaozong died, leaving the throne to our son. I mourned him deeply. He had been my partner for decades. As I dressed his body in funeral clothes, the scent of embalming spices thick in the air, I felt a chapter of my life close. He was the only man I ever truly opened my heart to. Yes, I loved him, in my own way. But I could not afford to grieve for long. Court officials expected that I, as Empress Dowager, would step aside and let the new emperor, our son Li Xian, Emperor Zhongzong, reign independently. Little did they know Wu Zetian was not stepping aside for anyone. I had broken every tradition to get here. I certainly wouldn't obey the one that said a widow must retire and live quietly. Instead, I made sure power remained firmly in my hands. The road to emperor. Emperor Zhongzong, Li Xian, was 27 when he ascended the throne. But he had no real experience. And more importantly, I did not trust him to be my puppet. Not long after he was enthroned, he showed signs of rebellion against my influence. In one incident, he tried to appoint his father-in-law to a high office without consulting me, boasting to courtiers that I may do as I wish now that I am emperor. That was unacceptable. I had spent decades building this empire's stability. I would not have a rash young man dismantle it, even if he was my son. So I removed Zhongzong within 6 weeks of his coronation. Imagine, an empress dowager deposing her own son. It stunned the court. I replaced him with his younger brother, my more pliant son Li Dan, who took the throne as Emperor Ruizong. Li Dan was dutiful and understood mother's word was law. I effectively ruled as regent from behind the scenes. Even so, whispers of dissent grew louder. To some, I had gone too far, a mother violating the natural order by usurping her offspring's position. Revolts sprouted like weeds. A prominent rebellion in 684 led by Tang loyalists under Li Jingye tried to restore the Tang line. In other words, to put some other prince on the throne and remove me. I responded with swift brutality. My generals crushed the rebellion in a matter of months, and I used the uprising as a pretext to eliminate dozens of aristocratic clans who had supported it. Blood ran in the streets of Chang'an and Luoyang as traitors' heads fell. Knowing I was now the prime target of conservative forces, I doubled down on security. I expanded the secret police's powers, perhaps too far. Spies lurked everywhere. Even speaking ill of Heavenly Empress Wu was enough to get one arrested and executed. The reign of terror grew so intense that later I had to rein it in, executing the most zealous secret police chiefs to placate public anger. Those were dark days. I will admit I lost some sleep wondering if I had become like a black mamba, biting at every shadow and paranoia. But each morning I would steel myself with the reminder. I did all this to ensure peace and prosperity. And indeed, apart from the elites who suffered, the common folk enjoyed stability. The granaries were full and bandits were kept at bay. If a bit of terror at the top bought tranquility below, so be it. By 690, I decided it was time to discard the charade of ruling through my sons. I was already effectively the sovereign. Why not claim the title officially? My advisors, the ones loyal to me, cautiously supported the idea. They drafted a petition urging me to take the throne in my own name, citing omens and popular support. Protocol required that I refuse a few times modestly. But in the end, I accepted the will of heaven and the people. In the autumn of 690, I formally declared the end of the Tang dynasty and the start of my own dynasty, the Zhou. I took the imperial name Sacred and Divine Emperor Zetian, an emperor, not empress, for I claimed equality with any man who had ever held the title. Ah, I remember the coronation ceremony vividly. The Grand Hall in Luoyang, I had moved the court to Luoyang, my preferred city, was decked in such splendor that day. Red lanterns and banners emblazoned with my chosen emblem, the phoenix, symbol of the female sovereign. Incense perfumed the air. I ascended the stairs of the Hall of Brightness in full regalia, a dragon robe tailored for a woman's form and a towering headdress that felt as heavy as the world. Drums and bells sounded as I seated myself upon the dragon throne. For the first time in Chinese history, a woman sat as sole monarch. I looked out at the sea of kneeling officials, some loyal, some seething with resentment behind bowed heads, and felt an almost overwhelming surge of triumph. I had shattered the ultimate glass ceiling of our civilization. A secret smile tugged at my lips as I recited the ritual words accepting the mandate of heaven. This moment was the culmination of every sacrifice, the blood, the lies, the nights of sorrow. I only wish my father could have seen me, but perhaps his spirit did, watching from the shadows of the hall as his little girl claimed the mantle of emperor. Yet even in that triumphant moment I felt a chill. Perhaps it was just a draft in the cavernous hall or the weight of the crown. But as the officials cried, "Long live Emperor Wu," I was struck by the loneliness of that perch. No empress stood beside me. Gaozong was gone. My sons were passed over. I alone was the apex of the pyramid. And when you are at the top, every problem below inevitably rolls uphill to you. I realized that attaining power had been a monumental task, but keeping it would be just as challenging, especially as age crept upon me. Still, I straightened my back and steeled my resolve. I was 67 years old, the oldest person ever to become emperor. But I told myself I was in my prime, wiser than any who came before. My feminine intuition, an asset that male rulers lacked. If they called me usurper, I would show them I could rule as well as any man, or better. The reign of Emperor Wu. So began my reign as Emperor of China in name as well as fact. The era of Zhou, Wu Zhou. I reigned officially from 690 to 705, 15 years. But in truth, I had held power long before then. These final years of my rule were among the most innovative and productive, but also challenging, of my life. Freed from the need to act through a figurehead, I issued imperial decrees with my own name and seal. I took full charge of policy, domestic reforms, foreign wars, cultural patronage. All carried my imprint. One of my first acts was to further elevate Buddhism as the state religion. The Confucian establishment had always opposed me, with their doctrine that a woman ruler was against the natural order. So I turned to Buddhism, which provided a useful alternative source of legitimacy. Monks eagerly supported me, even producing a sutra, the Great Cloud Sutra, which prophesied the coming of a female Chakravarti, world ruler, to bring salvation. Conveniently, they identified me with this figure. I built grand temples in every prefecture to spread the sutra's message. I funded magnificent projects like the Daeyeon Temple and had scriptures chanted in my honor. In Luoyang, I commissioned a colossal statue of Maitreya Buddha, with my own face subtly carved into its serene features. This was installed at the Longmen Grottos, a marvel of art. One can still gaze upon that giant Buddha today and discern a regal countenance that resembles portraits of me. Through these pious works, I declared to my people, "Heaven approves of Wu Zetian." We banned the slaughter of animals on certain days, and I patronized translations of Buddhist texts, earning the goodwill of commoners and clergy alike. At the same time, I didn't entirely neglect Taoism or Confucianism. I still honored our ancestors and kept the civil service exams rooted in classical learning. But I ensured Buddhism shone the brightest during my reign. Administratively, I continued to champion talent over birthright. I expanded the examination system further, even allowing women of exceptional ability to be considered for certain government roles. A truly radical move. A few women, usually my trusted ladies-in-waiting or secretaries like the brilliant Shangguan Wan'er, did rise to assist in literary and administrative tasks, though none held ministerial posts. Still, it was a start. I also created a group of elite scholars to draft new laws and codes, streamlining bureaucracy. I wanted officials to be more accountable, so I listened to feedback from censors, official watchdogs of corruption, and often promoted people who dared speak truth to me. Of course, critics would argue I only promoted sycophants. Not true. I valued loyalty, yes, but loyalty and honesty could coexist. A prime example was the famous de Rengier, a judge of great renown. He once wrote me a memorandum bluntly criticizing some of my harsh measures. Instead of punishing him, I brought him to court and eventually made him one of my chancellors in my later years. I appreciated principled men and women who, as long as they accepted my ultimate authority, could help me govern justly. Under my rule, the empire's bureaucracy functioned smoother than ever. We compiled agricultural textbooks, improved irrigation, and even ordered biographies of famous women to be written, elevating the status of women in our cultural memory. To strengthen Zhou's claim as a new dynasty, I took symbolic actions. I changed the characters of my name, even inventing a new character, Zhao Zhao, for myself, meaning the light of the sun and moon, to reflect my celestial mandate. I renamed the imperial family Wu. though that died with me and Tang's Li name was soon restored. I also paid attention to the frontiers. Our generals continued to fend off Tibetan incursions and handle the Khitans in the northeast. Diplomatically, I corresponded with the King of Silla, with the rulers of Japan, and others, asserting that the Emperor of Zhou, a woman, was their equal or superior. Some would not accept it, but they had little choice if they wanted to trade with the richest empire in Asia. Despite these achievements, my later reign was not without troubles. Aging is the one enemy even an emperor cannot defeat. By my 70s, my once boundless energy started waning. I suffered from bouts of illness, aches in my joints, perhaps arthritis, and occasional dizzy spells. I did not allow the court to see weakness. I still appeared in full makeup and extravagant attire, even famously wearing a false beard at court assemblies to look more like the male emperors of yore and underscore my authority. It was a ceremonial beard of fine black hairs. I felt ridiculous, but it did send a message that I was both emperor and empress in one body. Nevertheless, late at night, I felt the loneliness of my throne deeply. Gaozong was long dead, and though I had power, I had few genuine companions. My surviving sons, grown men now, were kept at a distance, one in honorary posts, another effectively under house arrest, as I didn't fully trust them. The halls of my palace in Luoyang were filled with courtiers and servants, but none I could call friend. So I sought solace in a most unlikely way, in love or perhaps lust, to stave off the chill of old age. In my widowhood, I had taken a lover once, Shui Huaiyi, a Buddhist monk much younger than me, who caught my eye with his charisma. For a time, he filled the void in my bed and my heart. I even gave him a temple to run and considerable influence. But he grew arrogant and destructive, abusing his favor. In a fit of jealousy, Shu burned down the Ming Tang, a magnificent hall I had built, and accidentally destroyed a huge wooden Buddha statue as well. That was the last straw. I had my guards strangle him quietly before he could cause more chaos. After that, I steeled myself to avoid such entanglements. But time makes fools of us all. In 697, when I was around 72, I allowed two handsome young brothers, the Zhang brothers, Zhang Yizhi and Zhang Changzong, to become my intimate companions. They were entertainers, skilled in music, dance, flattery, and the arts of pleasure. Initially, they were like a refreshing breeze in my cloistered life. They made me laugh with their youthful antics. One played the flute divinely, the other wrote poetry comparing my aging beauty to everlasting moonlight. A bit too flowery, but I enjoyed the sentiment. I felt like a woman again, not just an emperor weighed down by duty. I won't deny it. I indulged in these pleasures. I even granted the Zhang brothers high positions at court, which was scandalous. They began to act as gatekeepers to me, deciding who could see me and what matters were presented. It was comfortable at first. I could relax while they handled petty governance. But in my heart, I knew I was sowing seeds of my own downfall. The court and the people could tolerate many things from me: a woman emperor, harsh punishments, religious experiments. But they could not stomach the spectacle of an old woman besotted with young lovers. This eroded the respect I commanded. Critics at court sharpened their knives. Plots against me began to coalesce again. My own clan, the Wu family, and the loyalists of the Tang, Li family, both started positioning for what would happen after my death. My daughter, the Princess Taiping, and my eldest surviving son, the former Emperor Zhongzong, whom I had deposed but kept alive, were in contact with disaffected ministers. I was aware of some of these rumblings. In fact, in 699, I summoned all my Wu family members and made them swear an oath to peacefully accept a Li restoration when the time came, hoping to avoid a civil war between Wu and Li factions. I like to think this shows that despite everything, I still cared about the empire's stability above my personal ambition. I did not intend to found a lasting Wu dynasty if it would rip the country apart, but whether from foresight or fatigue, I had essentially conceded that the Tang line, my sons, would return after me. Little did I expect that moment would arrive so soon. By early 705, I fell gravely ill with an old age sickness. I was 80 after all. I was mostly bedridden in my private quarters. The Zhang brothers, ever opportunistic, tightened their hold and even discussed possibly taking power themselves if I were to die. Fools, truly. My enemies saw their chance. In a coup d'etat in February 705, a group of ministers and generals, with the tacit support of my son Zetian, the former Emperor Zhongzong, burst into the palace. It happened at dawn. I was lying feverish in bed, the winter wind rattling the window screens, when suddenly I heard shouting down the halls. The clatter of armored boots and drawn swords echoed alarmingly closer. My maidservant shrieked. I struggled to sit up, only to see the door slam open. In poured men I recognized Zhang Jianzhi, a respected official, and several generals, followed by, to my shock, Zetian, my son, whom I had exiled but not killed. He looked determined and strangely older than his years, with streaks of gray at his temples. Before I could speak, Zhang Jianzhi stepped forward and proclaimed, voice trembling slightly, a prepared decree. It announced Emperor Wu Zetian's abdication due to ill health and the restoration of Emperor Zhongzong to the throne. My son stood behind the official, eyes downcast, not meeting mine. In that instant, I understood that my rule was over. These men had no intention of harming me physically. In fact, they spared my life, perhaps out of residual respect, or simply to avoid bloodshed and chaos that might come from killing an old woman. The Zhang brothers were not so lucky. I learned later they were executed swiftly, their heads likely mounted on pikes as a warning to any who would imitate their presumptuous rise. As for me, I had to choose: fight and possibly plunge the empire into civil war, or relinquish power with dignity. The choice was clear. I was tired of fighting, scheming, killing. In a strange way, I felt relief wash over me along with the grief. I nodded assent weakly. With a shaking hand, I removed the imperial seal that I kept at my bedside and handed it to Zhang Jianzhi. The heavy jade seal, symbol of all I had worked for, felt cold against my palm for the last time. The Empress Regent? No, the Emperor will comply, I murmured. My voice came out thin but calm. I caught Li Qin's gaze at last. He looked startled, perhaps expecting rage or resistance. Instead, he saw only an old mother yielding to the inevitable. I managed a faint smile at him. Whether of forgiveness or irony, I'm not sure. They allowed me to live, as promised. Under guard, polite but a guard nonetheless, I was moved out of the main palace and back to a subsidiary palace in Luoyang, with titles downgrading me to just Empress Zetian again, then eventually Empress Dowager. My son Zhongzong was emperor once more and the Tang dynasty restored. The very next day, edicts went out proclaiming the end of my Zhou dynasty, the restoration of the Tang, and sadly, the erasure of many of my decrees. They smashed some of my statues, renamed my reforms, and praised me only in past tense for what good I had done. But notably, they did not harm me. I lived out my final months comfortably, if quietly, in a dignified house arrest. My servants still addressed me as Your Majesty in private. I could spend time reading, writing poetry, and now, writing this memoir. Occasionally, my grandchildren or daughters like Princess Taiping visited me. Those meetings were awkward, filled with formal bows and small talk, as if we all didn't know they had conspired to remove me. But I held no grudge. I understood the wheel of fortune had simply turned. Reflections of an aging empress. Now, as I conclude these recollections, the candles have burned low. The shadows in my chamber are long, like the shadows of memory that stretch behind me. I am 81 years old. Few monarchs live to such an age. My hands tremble as I lay aside the brush. What is left for Wu Zetian? In a sense, I have accomplished everything I set out to do and more. I once said that I wanted the word of my deeds to echo for 1,000 years, and indeed, my name will never be forgotten. But will it be cursed or praised? That I cannot control. They say I will be buried alongside Emperor Gaozong in the Grand Qianling Mausoleum outside Chang'an. The tomb is likely ready, the stone stele erected before it. On Gaozong's stele are inscribed all his titles and merits. On mine, nothing. I have decreed that my stele should be left blank. Let future generations carve the verdict of my life as they see fit. I know the Confucian historians will likely savage my reputation, calling me a usurper, a cruel murderess, an unnatural woman who defied her role. Perhaps they will dwell on the lurid tales, the baby I smothered. Yes, I confess that with a heavy heart. The rivals eliminated, the sons possibly poisoned, the lovers taken. They will paint me as a cautionary tale of female ambition. Yet, those who look deeper might see the full picture. I was also a capable and innovative ruler. I nurtured a golden age of culture and prosperity. I opened the highest ranks of government to men of talent rather than just aristocrats. I protected the common folk, lowered their taxes, and gave them peace after years of war. I patronized the arts and religions, leaving behind great monuments and fostering a flourishing of Buddhism that comforted millions. I held our empire's frontiers against external threats, preserving the unity of China. Even my political ruthlessness had a purpose: to clear obstacles so that stability could reign. If I had been a man, perhaps they would call me a strong emperor, even a great one, for these deeds. But I know I will always be measured differently. If I have one insight to offer after all this, it is that power exacts a price from those who wield it, a price paid in loneliness and loss. I sit here with no husband by my side. Gozong, I miss your gentle laugh tonight. No child who truly trusts me. My surviving children learn to fear me more than love me. And few friends. I sacrificed normal family happiness on the altar of empire. There were nights, even at the height of my glory, when I woke from nightmares and wondered if it was worth it. But then morning came, and messengers brought news of another province prospering, or another enemy kept at bay. And I told myself, yes, I truly believed I was the best person to guide the empire, and perhaps I was right. Look at how Tang China thrived, becoming the world's greatest power of our age. Would a male ruler have done better? It's pointless to speculate. I feel my strength waning with each passing week. I will likely not see the spring blossoms bloom again. When I die, they will place me in that grand tomb as Empress Consort of Tang, as if I had never been emperor in my own right. But the wordless stele standing guard over my grave will speak volumes. In its silence, it says that my life was too extraordinary, too controversial to be summed up in neat praises or condemnations. It challenges the world. Judge me if you can. I, Wu Zetian, daughter of Wu Shihuo, concubine of Taizong, wife of Gao Zong, mother of emperors, emperor of Zhou, the one and only female dragon throne holder. I have been all these things and more. I have been praised as a sage and damned as a tyrant, cherished as a mother and cursed as a murderess. Which of these was the real me? Perhaps all of them. Perhaps that is the burden of wielding great power. You wear many faces and leave behind a tangled legacy. The hour grows late. I will set down the final brushstroke now. Outside, I can hear the night watchman's wooden clapper and the distant howl of a winter wind. I close my eyes and I can almost imagine it's the past. The laughter of my youth in the palace corridors, the ring of Gaozong's voice calling my name, the sweet smell of peonies before I burn them, the weight of a tiny baby in my arms just before. No, I will not torment myself with that vision again. Instead, I choose to remember the roar of acclaim on the day of my coronation, and the quiet satisfaction of a well-ruled court on a peaceful morning, and the knowledge that I did not live in vain. History will judge me as it judges all. But I was here. I shaped history. I bent the rules of a patriarchal world and showed what a woman could do when given, or when she took, the chance. Whatever they write on that blank stele or in the chronicles, I know that my story will endure, inspiring debate and wonder for generations. And perhaps, somewhere, another young girl with fire in her heart will read of me and realize that the shackles society places on her can be broken. If my life lights such a spark, then I welcome both the laurels and the thorns that come with my memory. The ink is dry. The story ends as it began, with Wu Zetian alone, gazing into the unknown. The emperor is dead, the empress dowager will soon follow. But the woman, the soul that dared, lives on in these words. May heaven pardon my sins, and earth remember my name. Thus I conclude my memoir, in the hope that you understand the woman behind the legend.